Welcome to the AgEmerge podcast, brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. Your farming challenges are unique, so your practices should be too. We're here to share emerging ideas, build connections, and provoke conversation.
Get ready to improve your soil, your crops, your livestock, and your family's livelihood. I'm your producer, Kim Chase.
And I'm your host, Monty Bottens. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening today. Before we join the podcast, we'd like to let you know that Understanding Ag will be hosting a Soil Health Academy on Monty's farm this summer in Cambridge, Illinois, August 1st through the 3rd. This workshop will focus on implementing regenerative principles in a corn-soy rotation. What a great opportunity to see these concepts in action on the farm with instructors Gabe Brown, Shane New, Luke Jones, and Brian Doherty. Don't miss the powerhouse conversations guaranteed to take place. Head on over to the Soil Health Academy website at www.soilhealthacademy.org and click on the Education tab to see the Soil Health Academy upcoming workshops. And now, let's get on with the show. Today, we welcome Eric Fuchs, a consultant for Understanding Ag. Eric's work and experience make for a great conversation. He lives in southeast Missouri on a diversified livestock operation where they raise hair sheep and contract graze cattle. He's been using Holistic Planned Grazing for over 8 years and has managed grazing systems on his operation for more than 20 years. In addition to that, Eric also works in the water and wastewater industry as a source water protection technician. He works with small and large communities and with agricultural producers to help ensure community water protection. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's jump right in.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the AgEmerge podcast. I'm great to be joined today by Eric Fuchs. Eric, welcome. How are you doing today?
I am good, Monty, and I really appreciate this opportunity. Been looking forward to this all week.
Well, Eric, tell us your story for the listeners, just kind of who you are, where you're from, and how the journey that you've been on and what's gotten you to where you are today.
I appreciate that. It's actually quite interesting. So I'm from a little town in southeast Missouri, and that is not the Boot Hill. You have to tell everybody I'm not part of the Boot Hill. That's Arkansas.
I was going to ask you that.
I'm
You're
up
an
in the
uplander.
Exactly, yeah. I'm in the Ozarks, about 2.5 hours south of St. Louis, and had an interesting path. So went to the University of Missouri quite a few moons ago and did the typical get an agronomy degree and knew I always wanted to be in agriculture. My dad had been a part-time farmer whole life and delivered mail on the side, but always knew I wanted to do something in ag and did not enjoy college. But my senior year in college, I took an interesting class called Topics in Agronomy with a gentleman named Jim Garish. And Jim was, and really opened up my whole world on that there's something different out there. So it came back to the farm, started a grazing system, ended up having a little hiatus, went into the Air Force for 5 years and traveled a little bit and came back. And Missouri has been really forward, on money and cost shares. So we had a grazing system for about 25 years, kind of got into that, went down the road a little further and got trained in holistic management, went down and out to New Mexico and did 2 weeks with Kurt Gadzia. He used to be a trainer and kind of made it up to the next step of high density grazing. That was going to be the new thing. And I kind of got involved with Dr. Alan Williams a little bit and heard about Gabe Brown and those guys. And then about 8 years ago, I started, I guess it's been 10 years now, I started with a company called Missouri Rural Water Association. And I was in source water protection. So I like to say I was the guy that protected the water before it became drinking water. And so I got certified in treatment and distribution. And within about 10 minutes of that job, I'm like, holy cow, there's some problems out here with agriculture and drinking water. So had been friends with Doug Peterson for a long time. And interesting enough, they were having soil health training in RCS soil health training at Dave Brandt's farm. And I begged Doug to let me go. And I met Dave, which was just a wonderful man. And God rest his soul, and met Ray Archuleta, and that really opened up my world of the soil health thing. I'm like, I've really found the silver bullet, as I say. came back, really implemented it in my job, got involved with National Rural Water Association lobbying efforts. And I did a webinar for Gabe Brown and those guys. And about 2 years ago, they approached me and said, hey, would you like to be a consultant for Understanding Ag and work for Gabe and company? And I'm like, holy cow. I mean, could you pick a job more, that you wanted to do? So, and to add a little caveat to that, so I've been married to my wife for 5 years, who is a chiropractor and then does what's called nutrition response testing. And so I help her in the offices, and it's really kind of brought in the health side of it to like, holy cow, people are really sick. And so you've got agriculture, you got drinking water, you got the health side, you got food. It has really just molded us. She's got trained in soil health, and then I've done a lot of stuff in her world. I've learned what she's doing, and the soil health movement, the regenerative ag movement, for me actually seems like to be the golden egg, the perfect fit, something we need to do to change this world, make it a better place. So I know that's kind of out there and kind of airy-fairy, but it's really shaped and formed, where I've started down the road.
Well, that's great. I appreciate you sharing that. So tell me a little bit about your farming operation that you've got going on there.
Yeah, so we've got about 500 acres in the hills of southeast Missouri along, it's a river bottom along Black River, a lot of that pretty Ozark woodland area, and about half in grass. We've had a grazing system for, like I said, for about 25 years. We contract grazed about every type of cattle you can, which really opens you up on how our cattle are in the world, We've had sheep for years. Got a very intensive grazing, done everything from high density to continued stocking. I say, like, made about all the mistakes we could that you can out there, kind of learned with it. So right now we've cut back quite a bit on animals because I travel so much, which in turn we had talked about some other things. I travel so much, it really makes it hard to manage like we want to manage. Kind of showed me some of the labor issues, trying to find somebody to help you, but really enjoy the livestock aspect of it. Have played around with row crops years ago as a family farm, but we haven't been involved in that quite some time, but still pretty directly involved with it with my job in that regards.
Well, definitely a well-rounded background, and it's going to be pretty exciting to visit today about those things. And I really want to focus on the water quality types of things too. So I think that's important for farmers to know what we're doing there. And so first off, what is a source of water? What does that mean? Let's get maybe some definitions and some understanding, make sure we're all on the same page.
Absolutely. So the majority, I would say everybody around the United States receives their water from two sources. There's either groundwater or there's surface water. The vast majority, especially in a state like Missouri, the vast majority get their water out of lakes or reservoirs or rivers. The Mississippi and Missouri River, a lot of people, that's where they receive their water. You get out in other places.
And we're talking, in this case, we're talking drinking water.
Drinking water, yes. Everything I'm talking about is going to be drinking water, yeah. Okay. And then a lot of other places, you get out west and some of those, they get it in groundwater. And groundwater's, for the most part, you can say is somewhat of a better source. It takes less to clean up, less things, but you get in the surface water. And what I like to joke is, because I do have a little training in wastewater as well, which is wastewater is what we get out the other end. And everything we do as a farmer, or we do as a person, what we flush down our toilet, I say all water becomes somebody's drinking water one time or another. So, when I worked around the country and see the different state of it, I think we take for granted that we turn on a faucet and that water's clean, but there takes a lot of work and money and effort to make that clean and drinkable for people around us and around the world, really.
Yeah, and it amazes me, just as a fun aside here in the Quad Cities, the Mississippi River is the major source for the drinking water for the municipalities, but Moline has theirs upstream and their wastewater discharge on the city border downstream, and then Rock Island has their intake right on their border and their wastewater downstream. It's like, you guys figured out you're emitting where this one's intaking, and
that's
it. That's just fun. The wastewater standards are supposed to be equal to or better than than the river. But then again, in the Mississippi, that isn't hard to accomplish. But
that's very true. Yeah.
So these are the different water sources. Now, how does agriculture play into that? So we'll break it down into the two different areas of well water. We're kind of familiar with historic issues resulting from atrazine and allichlor, and those kind of things. And then on the surface water, we have other things in addition to chemistries, but crop nutrients and causing, oxygen status, pH changes, algae, those kind of things. So break it down into the groundwater and the surface water. What are some of the things that municipalities and other people who are using this as a drinking water source dealing with?
And to add a little bit to it, what I find with agriculture, it's a quantity and a quality issue. Because you get in many states, it's not only the quantity that is or the quality that's happening, but like you said, the quantity of. See that in California a lot. But as I started this job and seen things, I'm going to make a pretty blanket statement here. I would tend to say about 95 to 98% of all issues in drinking water stem from agriculture use. And I've caught a lot of flack, talking about and stuff like that. But anything that comes off that farmer's field, whether it be a fertility issue or, like you said, atrazine issue, does end up being somebody else's problem in drinking water. And in the regulatory world, we have what's called point and non-point pollution. So, you're familiar with that. Point, I always say it's something I can see, it's something I can look at, like an industrial plant or a wastewater plant. But a non-point pollution is everything else, usually an ag type field. And the point type pollutions are very heavily regulated. And for the most part, because of those regulations and work they've done, have done a very good job keeping their water clean. But the non-point is very non-regulated. I'm happy with that. But with that said, that is where most of the pollution ends up coming from. From a groundwater issue, we see you get out in Nebraska and Kansas, up in Wisconsin, Minnesota, nitrates. Nitrate are huge issues. For the most part, chemicals do not end up being too much of a problem in drinking water unless there's a direct spill, but the nitrate issues are huge. And we have a 10 part per million. You get out in areas of Kansas that we work, and we've tested 30 irrigation wells, and 28 of them will be well over 10 parts, and a lot of them in 20 or 30 parts, even enough that we have them figure in fertility based off what their irrigation water is. You get into the surface water, like the Mississippi, Missouri River, then you start getting into your atrazines, like glyphosate, for instance, it's not a regulated type chemical, but you get your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your chemicals. The dead zone is fertilizers. I mean, it's just, and we can get in some very touchy discussions on what's causing it, and I have my opinion. And when you see what comes off some of these Iowa farm grounds, you see what's coming off Illinois farm grounds, you see the lack of effort in the nutrient reduction strategies. That's what we get. For one more example, I remember in Missouri, there's a lot of places as corn ground would start to open up, as I would say, they would start upping their carbon levels in their treatment plants so they wouldn't go out of compliance of atrazine. So they managed around it and do a decent job with it. But the fact is, that's money. That is, that goes back to the Des Moines lawsuit and different things that we've seen over time. So just a lot of problems that are easily solved, easily handled if we just use the 6 principles of soil health. It really is.
Right. And just as a side note, Gabe and I had a little discussion that there's 5 principles and then there's one law. It's the law of context. So the verdict is still out with Gabe and I. He agreed on the podcast, but you don't want to change all the literature. You've got it all printed, so we'll just leave it that way. Anyway,
plus we know Gabe is always right. Just ask him. Right?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell him you said that. So, hey. So let's talk about the point source emission thing, point source pollution. So why is my tile dumping into an open water stream not a point source? Why is my waterway draw coming out of my field not a point source?
That is nothing more than lobbyists and regulations. I mean,
that is one that is one regulation or law away from changing.
That's it. I have a really powerful slide I show in a presentation, and I show an outfall from a wastewater plant, and I show a tile outfall from a field. And I ask, what is the difference between them? And of course, nobody can answer. And I said, the only difference is regulations. And I would also venture to say that normally what's coming off that field is going to be more contaminated than what's coming off that wastewater plant. And that scares me from a producer standpoint, because that, we've got a strong lobby, we've got a lot of things that's saying, but the fact is there is no difference other than the regulatory side of it.
And the reality is that's a battle that you can sustain but not win.
That's it.
In my opinion. I mean, we will spend the money lobbying efforts to keep that out of regulation as long as we can, but eventually, right, something will come.
It will come, and I will have to say something should come, and I want it to come through changes of practices, because the regulators know where the problems are. It is no secret, that's why I believe we have Waters of the U.S. We have a lot of these things that are trying to go that direction, and we all know that regulations, the unintended consequences of regulations are never what we want. They may be great intended, but the consequences of it are bad. So let's clean our act up now. And the fact is, we've got the technology, we've got the cost share, we've got the ability, it's economically feasible, and it's not that hard to do with existing everything we've got. And that's a struggle for me when I look over and drive around the country. I'm like, we can do this now. And if we don't, we're going to be made to do it, and it's not going to be pretty.
That's a great point. Now, let's back up the truck just a little bit, because not everybody that's listening may know that we're part of the problem, because we've been told we do great jobs. Farmers are wonderful. We're doing our best. We're very conservation minded and those kind of things. Let's talk about what is happening with runoff, because that's a bigger issue. What are some of those things that are leaving our fields based on the practices that we're doing today on row crop land that's causing these problems?
From my standpoint, when I look at the big three, it's sediments, nitrogen, and phosphorus. And we can go into some of the chemicals, but everything we do in regards to tillage or things is in that top very small amount of the soil. So when we lose anything at all, whether it be blowing in the Illinois, wind, or washing off in some of these round trains, it's nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediments. And it is really because of like you said, poor farming practices. That is what creates dead zones. That is what creates water quality issues. And but that's the big three, and I always associate that with, because that's what we fight in the drinking water regulatory world: nitrogen, phosphorus, and cleanups of things like that.
And it's important to know not all phosphorus is the same in this regard. There's different forms of phosphorus, and nitrogen is fairly simple. It's nitrate. Nitrate's water soluble. Ammonium sticks to the clay until it becomes nitrate, then it's water soluble. So that one's pretty simple, straightforward. But phosphorus is a little bit different animal, and Ohio State did some work on this. Soluble reactive phosphorus is the one that's the real booger, right? That easily moves, water soluble and those things. And I remember one time going up north to Winnipeg to the Soil Congress, World Soil Congress, and went out to do a field tour after the event. And they said one of the things they fight is with cover crops. When they're green and it freezes there and the ground's frozen, all of that phosphorus that's inside the plant is that soluble reactive phosphorus form. So when they get a rain and the ground still froze, it's just like an instant ejection of soluble reactive phosphorus off of the ground. So, here we are, cover crops are great, but in their instance, in their climate, it can potentially cause additional phosphorus runoff.
And I think, we were always taught, probably as you were, that phosphorus is always attached to a soil particle. It has everything to do with erosion. And then, like you said, now we're taught water soluble. And my thoughts are with it, I think if we just stop the erosion or cut the erosion in half, everything else will kind of fall into place. Not that that's not a problem, but it's like such a out of my, it's just, Doug Peterson and I gave a presentation to Bill Stowe. I'm going off a little bit on the things, but from the Des Moines Waterworks. Mm-hmm. And we said, if we just had a cover crop, a single species cover crop on the ground up here in Iowa, I don't care what it is. I don't care. It doesn't matter. We could solve 95% of the water quality issues. So like you said, we've got those other things, but just keep the soil in place would be huge.
Right. And then there, the interesting part about that then is how does that happen, right? So you're talking about we can have the stick of regulations, or there's some carrot efforts going on out there, but what is a farmer's responsibility today? It's typically elective, right? And just does it out of the right thing to do, versus what will that be tomorrow? What do you see happening there, carrot stick wise, on water qualities issues?
We've got tons of carrots out there right now. Anybody that wants to go down this path can do it. But you had mentioned something that's kind of hard to talk about, but the individual producer has been told that everything he's doing is right. And so I can come in with more carrots and more carrots and more carrots, but the education component of the fact, why don't we first just admit there's a problem? We can stop trying to blame and it's urban or rural. Let's just say, hey, there is a problem. Let's don't do more research. Let's don't do more anything. We know it's there. So let's try to tackle the problem. But like you said, the regulatory side of it will never be what we want. I mean, you can go up in Chesapeake Bay, you can go in some of these areas and some of the crazy stuff they've implemented, on laws that are quite radical, for lack of a better term, never solve the problem. But I think the first thing is a lack of overall education. When I talk to producers, I say, I don't care what you do on your farm, but as soon as it leaves your farm, it becomes somebody else's problem. And until we understand that, think in that realm, or know that, then we're never going to be able to solve the issue. But it does become somebody else's problem.
Right. And I think that's important for us to recognize, and always question everything as farmers that we're doing. Is this the best? Is there something I can be doing better? Not just be satisfied with, well, we're doing what we can. I think we can always do things better. And we have to look at systems that are more diverse, longer season growing. Even what I'm doing today on our own farm, no-till cover crops and integrated livestock, it's okay. We still have issues. I mean, far less than someone who's full on conventional tilling and no cover crops, but we're not perfect. We're not as good as what the natural system was in place prior to man doing what man's done, right?
Yeah, and
how do we get closer?
It's funny. The fact is, I think there's so much low-hanging fruit. When we start down the path as a consultant with some of these guys, I feel like just managing their existing nitrogen. I mean, I can take away, I can let them till. We don't have to talk about cover crops. I think just management of the nitrogen. How about let's not apply nitrogen in the fall? We are always 180-degree day away, from what's going to happen. I've never really been able to get a good definitive answer.
It's cheaper and I have time to do it.
Exactly. And I hear it all the time. And like I said, I've never got a definitive answer that says, okay, how many days at 70 degrees, or, I know we put the stabilizers on it and we do all of that, but the fact is, if we just managed around what we use now, and I could cut 25% straight across the board by split applications or putting it on when it's needed, using the 4R strategies, before I even got down the road of no-till and cover crops. So there's just so much low-hanging fruit. I mean, we have soil testing science that's, how old is it? We can put something on Mars, but I can't come up with a good soil testing procedure that says what I can do now and then. It's just a guessing game. So it's frustrating to see how much low-hanging fruit is without even talking about the principles and covers and no-till and stuff that is out of some people's comfort zone.
The AgEmerge podcast is brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. The ASN team is hands-on, digging in and invested in regenerative agriculture. Along with the proper plant nutrition and biologicals to boost your soil microbiome, we provide the ideas and implementation guidance to support you on your soil health journey. So stop farming the same way and contact Ag Solutions Network today at asn.farm.
So two big things you've mentioned right there. Plant a cover crop, any cover crop. Get rid of out of season application of nutrients. Apply at planting or after. Those two things right there. Water quality impact. If you could do that across the entire 300 million acres of farmland in the U.S., does that take away 75% of our issues?
I'm confident at least 75%. I mean, when you drive around the country, you've done it just like me. You can't unsee things once you go down this road. And when you see the amount of bare ground, and I mean, if I can do two things, I can keep the ground covered and I can scavenge up those nutrients in a living root or a living plant. That's it. I mean, it really is that simple. That's what nature does. And like I said, we're not talking about a 28 species diverse mix. It's got to be crazy. I'm just talking, and even if we planted cereal rye in December or January and it got up an inch tall, we've seen the impact of what just a little bit of effort will do in this regard.
Yeah. If you can make, here's what I looked at is I remember when I'd fly to California, I'd fly out over our farm, going from Moline to Chicago, and I'd look down and see our stuff, and it was kind of cool. And then you'd look out just on the vastness of everything. And it always hit me. It's like, I could do everything as perfect as possible on 2,000 acres, but it is a complete drop in the ocean. But if I could help 1 million acres get 10% better, that's 50 times more impact than I could ever do on what I'm farming myself. So I'm with you. If we could just everybody take the next right step, just do the next right thing wherever you're at on your journey. So, if you're listening to this, if you haven't, what are you going to do next year? What's the next thing you're going to do next year? Now's when you're thinking about it. Do it, get it done, and just keep taking those steps forward. I think we get too comfortable doing what we're doing because we've always done it that way and we know it works. No, you don't know it works. You don't know what you're not doing, how it works. So,
and we could go down the road of why things happen the way they are. That would probably be another 4 or 5 podcasts with farm programs and the reason the landscape is like it is and what's planted on the landscape and why, so, but there are reasons. I think if things were economically like they should be, we would see a lot more adoption of things we do. If the consumer was driving the train more, I think we would see a whole lot. If the consumer, I had a really great quote from an NRCS soil health specialist that was a farmer. And he said, Eric, when I go sell my corn down at the river, they never ask me what was the water quality like on my farm. So nothing is ever based off both quantity or what you're doing on your own place or the ecological impact of things that's happening. And I think we do have the responsibility to ask those questions. And if we can't do it ourselves and somebody else is going to start asking them and saying, we expect more from you, we want more for you, we're willing to pay for it. Or what if we did like non-point? I do not want to pick on any farmers, but what if folks were fined? Like a wastewater plant or a point pollution, if they pollute, they are fined. Can you imagine if the regulations come to the point and says, okay, if the water quality coming off your drain tile is above 10 parts, we're going to fine you? There's the carrot and stick, and my gosh, I don't want the stick, but I'm telling you, the stick is coming.
Right. Okay, so now you mentioned earlier about your wife being a chiropractor. That has to provide an interesting perspective to what you do because chiropractic health is a little different approach, a more holistic approach to health than, let's say, traditional medical doctors. And I imagine your wife has interesting conversations with her clients about their concerns on water and food quality and those kind of things. How has that opened her approach to healing, and also, the clients that she worked with? How does that relate back to what you do on your farm and how you consult with people. I mean, that has to be an interesting combination.
Yeah, it has really opened my eyes from a completely different world because we've got a Missouri practice, and I actually help out and do some of the scheduling with her every now and then and get
Oh, I
people
thought you were in there doing manipulations.
Well, I got one more week of training. She's going to allow me to do that. She doesn't let me talk to many people. It has completely opened up my eyes, number one, for how sick people actually are, how people are sick walking around. And I think it's a combination of very, very poor diets and not just diet choices by them themselves, but it's the ability to even understand good food from bad food and the type of food that we are raising as a group. And it's also, I think, also the heavy toxic load in our environments. We are, since the 1950s, we are a very toxic laden environment. And so when I see the changes she can make in people by changing their diets, and she uses, like I said, what's called nutrition response testing. She uses muscle testing to find the basic of what's wrong with the body, and then change of diets and supplemental, natural supplements, standard process up in Wisconsin. Some of these places she uses a lot of to get their path on the health. But, I think she completely came into my world and saw, okay, what's going on? And then I came into her world, and I joke, I'm not even able to use the word glyphosate in my household. I'm not even, Roundup is not even a term we can use. But at the same time, when I bring my world into her, I said, listen, we've got such a gradient of what we have to come down. We can't come into producers and say we got to cut everything out at one time, or we got to stop or completely change the way we're doing things. So it's definitely made a good balance on her to see what is actually out there in the real world, and for me to see her world and how sick people are and how much help they need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating to see that connection. And you made the comment there, teaching people what good food is and what bad food is. Why do we even have bad food?
Well, that's a good question.
About that there wasn't such a thing in the past. It was food.
and that's what we have to think is, like, what is good food and what's bad food, and how much food are actually farmers taking part in actually raising right now. I wrote a little blog one time for UA on the fact that most farmers buy their food from the same place people in Los Angeles or New York City or anybody else does. How much food is actually raised compared to what it was in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And I'm not advocating going back to the horse and carriage and technology of back then, but the fact is we have gotten so disconnected with our food supply as producers that I think it's became dangerous. And it sounds like I'm picking on individual producers, and I'm not. I think it's just been a mindset as much as anything of how we've gotten so specialized in what we raise and how we do it that we've actually disconnected ourselves from the food supply.
And not to pick on us producers too, but when you think about it, if we can hit those two goals of a cover crop and reduce nitrogen rates or fertilizer rates in general at the time of planting or after, that's good for us on our pocketbooks. Mm-hmm. That's good for us in yield, and that's good for us in soil quality for mm-hmm. future generations. So mm-hmm. all of these things are complementary. So they should be goals of yours anyway. So, yes. Anything, yes. I think okay, so see, you'll be an authority on this. Everybody's talking about measuring the impacts of regenerative ag, and everything is looking at carbon, right? What is the carbon in the soil? Are we changing carbon in the soil? And there's been hundreds, thousands of studies trying to isolate where carbon is. And there's different pools and different locations and different forms of carbon and stability. Nobody can figure it out, right? I mean, it's not from a lack of research dollars being thrown at it, right? Nobody can figure it out. But guess what? We can easily measure that indirectly related, that will, what do I want to say, will be an indicator of soil quality other than just carbon. We can measure water quality. Mm-hmm. We can measure nutrient density of the crops that we're doing. We can measure air quality. We can measure habitat as far as insect quality and diversity, mammals, birds, other living creatures there. All of these things can be results oriented that we can do today without trying to figure out things. What do you see if we could use water quality measurements as a report card on the quality of work we're doing as farmers in order to get incentive payments versus carbon credits?
It's such a better driver. And we know carbon drives the system, but carbon is like anything else. It's going to be cyclical. If we're in carbon, hopefully we want an upward trend on our operations, but it is a cyclical type thing. But when our overall job in the soil health world and as producers is to build an aggregate. We want to build an aggregate. And when we do that, everything comes together. So like you said, if we measure water quality and quantity, what's running off our place, what type is running off our place. Then, like you said, the nutrient dense food, there's so much of an ecological aspect that I've seen. When I started down the road of soil health, I kept saying, this is the answer. This is like the golden egg. This is like the basic. If I solve these issues, everything else comes together. And I truly do that. I see that. And like you said, I think we measure the wrong things to get that. It should be the quality of food coming off our place, the quality of the community dynamics and animal dynamics that's on my place. What's the water quality coming off? Have springs started showing up again as the water cycle? We get a lot of talk on climate change and global warming and a lot of other political terms that are thrown out there. But the way we have messed up the water cycle, both macro and micro, you see it every day. We had a 6-inch rain the other day in about 4 hours. 6 inches. We have so messed up the water cycle. So you're right. We are measuring the wrong things.
And the neat part is those are simple measurements that can be made that are highly accurate, that give us immediate feedback for what we've done.
So you're going to go down a road we can't come back here real quick.
Yeah, I know. So I think that's something that it needs to be explored. And if people want to have environmental quality as part of their portfolio to reward and compensate for, I think that's something that can be.
Yes.
Okay. You mentioned Jim Garish, and when he was in Missouri, and he couldn't even handle Missouri; he had to go to Idaho. So, I mean,
he got bored.
Yeah, he got bored there. So he's got better mountains, even though the Ozarks are nice. The mountains he's at now out in Idaho are pretty amazing. That's pretty neat that you were trained by the kick the hay habit. So I have to ask you, are you feeding hay? You're a contract grazer, so the answer should be no to this.
Absolutely not. I tell you what, we quit hay. I think we sold all of our hay equipment in, oh my gosh, 93, 94. And when we needed hay, we'd buy hay in. But Jim Garish was the pioneer of and Ron Morrow happened to be another gentleman, Dr. Ron Morrow. Those guys were pioneers because Jim had just brought that back from New Zealand, and the technology wasn't there. But I have to give kudos to Missouri NRCS and Missouri Soil and Water by having cost share way before anybody else. Because I have to say, looking back, I've got mixed feelings about government programs. Without the cost share, I wouldn't have started it. Knowing what I know now, I would definitely would. But so to come full circle with that, yeah, the getting out of the hay, and when you travel the rest of the country, holy cow, the overstocked of people, how much hay is being fed, the out of whack economics in agriculture and livestock agriculture, especially, it opens your eyes when you travel around.
So the best way to adopt no-till is to sell your tillage equipment. And the best way to adopt a no hay strategy to sell your hay equipment is what you're saying.
Absolutely. And I have never not been able to find hay. I always find that everybody plans for that one bad year 69 years ago that my dad had on that one bad winter where we couldn't find hay. So from there on out, that's what our whole management plan is. But we've always been able to find hay.
Yeah. So Jim Garish, wrote the book, Kick the Hay Habit, and he's been an advocate for that for a long time. But no, that's a pretty neat story that you've got there. and
Yeah, it was
learning
interesting.
from Jim, and then you went on to learn from holistic management. So that
Yes.
would, that has Alan Savory's fingerprints on it, and then you got connected up with Alan Williams. So you've gotten like the three godfathers of intensive rotational management, or managed grazing, or holistic management, adaptive management. You pick the term. It's keep the animals together and move them more often.
It is. And the management becomes in your court and not their court. And it's funny because they all have brought pieces of the puzzle. I mean, from understanding ag, we talked about adaptive grazing, and I do understand that because, when we came home from holistic management, it was all high density. So that's all we did, is everything wanted to be high density. And it is neat once you see the aspects of a truly adaptive type system. Nature is so different. Nature never does anything at the same time, and always got into that habit when we graze stocker cattle. They'd come off the truck at the same time of year. They would come out of the corral into the same paddock. They would make our system. At the end of we got ready to ship them out. They were in that same paddock and they went out. And it was just a system. And we as humans, Dr. Williams talks about this all the time. We are so system oriented. And it's almost like we need to wake up each morning and go, I think I'm going to do this, or I think I'm going to do this. And I think you'll be right more times than if you try to create a system.
Right. We love recipes. So
we do.
No, that's a great point. And, cows and cattle are great at making beef, but they're just terrible at managing pasture.
They are. And I tell you what, honey, I just returned from South Dakota. Did some work on the Lakota Sioux up there, and I got to drive all the way through the sand hills and up there. And I try not to be dramatic, or I try not to be overly concerned. I like to be optimistic, but boy, when you see that fragile part of the country, or those Nebraskan sand hills, some of those things are right, to me, my opinion, on the edge of collapse. It is amazing what we have done to degrade some of the most productive lands in the world, probably from a grazing standpoint. And it is just poor management of livestock.
And, and I really feel that the 100th is now the 90th in rainfall. And it's not going to be too long until it's the 80th.
Yes.
And what we've been experiencing, today is it's pretty dry through the Corn Belt. So
yes.
It's irregular, and there is a water cycle to it, and there's just no reason to stimulate a local water cycle. We've been blessed in this neighborhood by the macro, from the Gulf, but that can only last so long. So, as you get to the west, they're more dependent on the local vegetation and those kind of things.
Yes.
But no, that's fascinating. And I think talk about now, and people that are integrating livestock or doing grazing, when you're doing that rotational management, adaptive grazing, its impact on the water cycle.
I think that living root.
I mean, water quality is what I should.
Okay, yeah.
Water cycle.
It's once again like we talked about the two principles of a living root in the soil and armor on the soil. I think we have the natural filtering effect of soil, of nature, and everything else, and that truly is when we just. The biggest thing, we don't use that give and take of the earth of we're going deeper and deeper in our aquifers. Not only is it a quality, it's a quantity issue too. But anytime you can use the natural filtration of the ground, that's how you get it. And that's even even it goes into rivers or it goes into our groundwater. That natural filtration of that, but that does not work without biology. That does not work without a living root in the soil or living plant growing. It does not work like it's, and I think, you had mentioned, I think we're truly seeing how we've affected our overall water. We get these deluges of rains, and I think the averages in Missouri are about the same, but the way it comes is just overwhelming. So just to add in what you said on that, it's just crazy how we're getting our rainfall now.
Right. And I remember, Jerry Hatfield's documented that and talks a lot about that. Yeah, it's not the total. And Ellen Taylor has too. It's not the total. It's the events. which is unfortunately causing, less of it to go in the ground to grow the crop because it just cannot get into the ground because of the way things are.
I've got pictures in the boot hill down here. So they get 40 to 50 inches of rain and they irrigate another 30, cheap water tables, 10, 12 foot, high. I've got pictures where the corn will be twisting and 10 feet over water will be standing. They have disrupted the water cycle. And that's just one example. We were out in California in March, I guess, where they were getting all the floods. This is water standing everywhere. And the fact is the water, when they get these big rainfalls, it just runs off. They can't keep it. So we are in that drought flood cycle. As we joke in Missouri and you in Illinois, we're 2 weeks from a drought. And that drought flood cycle is just right next to each other. And because we've just broken the system.
Yeah. Yeah. We're a little more fortunate. We got an extra glacier that you didn't. So we've got a little longer. But I know in Southeast Kansas, it's a 5-day thing. And as you come into Missouri, it's 10. Up here, we're closer to 20. So, you had those mountains in a way that glacier didn't come. So anyway, but we got the good dirt that came down from Wisconsin. So that's what makes it work here. So,
but you're still in Illinois. Don't forget now.
I know. It does amaze me how much work Missouri, Iowa, Indiana, and all in Kentucky, everyone around us has done in soil quality and soil health initiatives. And then there's us. So, so earlier before we got on the recording here, you were talking a little bit about virtual fencing, interest in that, and what's your latest thoughts on that, and how that can be a tool potentially for producers to consider when they're integrating I say fifth principle, you'll say sixth principle.
I think the amount of technology we have coming out now in all of this regenerative world opens up so many minds to, so many things we can do. And from my standpoint, when I'm not home, when I have a smaller farm, I can't afford some outside labor. And boy, some of those tools I think become wonderful for me. Now, should they take the place of management of eyes on the ground any chance I get, or make sure I'm actually managing those livestock? But man, when I can look at different areas of my place, it's almost impossible to get a poly wire in, or different places that I want to move cows every 2 days or sheep every 2 days that I just can't labor wise make it done. I really think there's places for these. And, from my personal standpoint, the economics were still kind of too close. And, but I think the way that technology is coming on a virtual fence or soil testing technology or planners that are getting instantaneous soil samplings, there is so much, and people we're working with, I think there's so much technology that's getting ready to come off the shelf to make this world of regenerative agriculture and intensive management so much easier and so much better, as long as the education component comes in with it. And I know Gabe probably beats that in when he talks with you a little bit. We have to have the overall education to be able to understand why we're using the stuff. But from my standpoint, I think this technology has really got its place.
So talk to us a little bit about impacts you've been able to make in your time here with other growers, and just some stories maybe of wins that kind of stick out in your mind, especially, overall wins, but especially because water is such a key thing of what you're about and your experience, some wins in the water realm too.
I tell you what, the water realm was really big getting involved in National Rural Water Association, and for them to actually now get an audience of like, listen, this is important. And I'm always telling the guys from UA, I said, let's don't talk about clean water. Let's talk about clean drinking water, because there's a difference. And when you talk about clean water, it's also kind of like, well, we want to get kids off drugs. It's something that everybody can agree on. And if you don't agree to clean drinking water, then you got to look at, okay, it just creates that aha factor of like, wow, we really need to do it. And I think it goes across party lines. And so that was something I think working with Rural Water and with UA, because Gabe and company has really allowed me to go down in that realm with some of the primacy agencies, EPA, and really kind of create things, because they see us now as a solution to their problems. When you talk to regulators, even EPA from the federal standpoint, state regulators, we've got a big project with Missouri DNR right now on education and soil health. And so these folks, once they get trained, they know this is the solution to their problems. They've always been taught it's engineered solutions. Like in Decatur, Illinois, we're going to dredge a lake and spend $90 million and spend another $60 million on a water plant. They've been taught that it's engineered solutions. Not only that, we're starting to see it go into the realm of FEMA, Corps of Engineers. We can't keep building bigger levees, right? They see it, they call them nature-based solutions now is the big fancy word. And I mean, housing and urban development, FEMA, Corps of Engineers, the primacy agencies like EPA and DNRs in Illinois, they see us as a solution, regenerative ag and these as a solution. And that's been a huge win to say, look at us. We do truly have solutions to a lot of problems. Personally, on this, being able to consult and go all over the United States, it has been eye-opening on, number one, how many people do want to change, to see every place you go to may have a different why. Some we're tired of losing money, or some we're tired of being sick and we're tired of operating this way. And I've seen older producers, when I say older, in their late 70s, that have a complete new rekindled purpose by doing the soil health thing. It's like, man, we're actually farmers again. We're doing things again. And so all the different folks, I mean, I've had people I've consulted with that are doing it from a somewhat prepping standpoint. They want to be able to survive on their own. And we're working with a lot of Indian reservations on indigenous communities on, hey, we want to get back to what we think are the old ways. And so the amount of different whys people are doing this, it just blows me away. And it's a movement. Maybe it's because I'm in the middle of it, but it's a movement like I've never seen happen on anything else. You've been in agriculture long enough. We've seen it. Oh, well, here's the next big thing. And oh, here's going to be the thing that saves the world. I'm kind of one of those weird guys that think that what we're doing, what you're doing with these podcasts, what I'm doing with water quality, consulting, UA, Soil Health Academy, this is going to change the world. This is what we have to do to change the entire world and getting down the road of taking care of this little ball that we live on.
So what does that change look like 10 years from now? What's it going to be?
I think so much of it depends on whether the change is allowed to happen. I mean, the movement is huge. But there are a lot of other players that would probably rather us not change. I mean, let's just say it like it is. Until the Farm Bill changes, we won't see major changes until the consumer is made to be able to drive this train more, until we demand clean drinking water, we demand nutrient-dense food, and we demand that part of raising food is an ecological standpoint as well. Sometimes I get very optimistic when I'm out, but you get very pessimistic because I think the movement needs to come much quicker, but there are a lot of groups that don't want it to happen.
Mm-hmm. So I agree with that. So now, what do you personally want it to look like in 10 years from now? Your impact on agriculture, what do you want it to be 10 years from now?
I always say, if I was a king for a day, I would want it to be, as crazy as it sounds, 5, 6, whichever we agree on, those 6 principles when it comes to agriculture. I think every single decision needs to be made on the farm standpoint of that. From a consumer standpoint, I think decisions they need to be made would say, hey, we're going to buy food choices based off quality, nutrient dense stuff like that. I want to see a landscape that is, honestly, you could even go back to maybe the sweet spots of the 40s and 50s and see how farms were set up then with the diversity of a farm itself. We had a pretty good model going on right there with a few tweaks that we could do based off technology and know-how and knowledge we have of soils and biology and things that way. But I would like to see these diverse farms. I would like to see so many people actually intimately involved in agriculture. I would like to see farmers actually raising food and being more of a, backyard gardens, backyard chickens, and things of that nature. I do really think we've got the ability. When we were out at Chico and we were in all those almond groves and vineyards and stuff, California alone could feed this entire world. I'm sorry, the entire United States without even trying. I mean, the amount of ability to graze sheep under vineyards or have cover crops here, having growing stuff here, vegetables over here. We're so non-diversified now that I think we've taken away what the ability we have. So I'm kind of talking in circles a little bit right there, but I see the movement that you're doing and I'm movement in 10 years to solve so many of these world's problems. I'm not sure I know quite how to get there. If I was king for a day, I would definitely have less government and probably more capitalistic ways of getting there based off what the consumer demands and wants. That answer that question? I kind of go around in circles a little bit.
There's no right answer to it. We'll replay this 10 years from now and see what happens. So
exactly.
But no, I appreciate your thoughts and insights on that and your efforts and what you're trying to do and accomplish. So, anything else that we should have visited about today while we had our time together? Other thoughts and ideas bouncing around inside of your head and your team's head?
I think the team, both mine and the team, I've never thought this growth would have been like it is. And I'm not saying this from a bragging standpoint or economic standpoint, but I think I was one of 3 consultants a year ago, and now there's like 14. I mean, it is unbelievable how this movement has gone. And it's been from these are solutions to a lot of different problems. And the amount of people that are reaching out, like I said, from my wife's standpoint, I joke when I go to her conferences, she's got people that are interested in soil health, and she goes to my conferences and they're doctors and people that they're interested, in a new way of doing things. So the education component, we have got to continue to figure out how to get and things like this are as important as anything. I feel like we have to do things to make a quicker change, because I always feel like I get all excited after getting off a talk like this, and I'm all pumped up, and then I drive across Iowa and I'm like, holy cow, I've driven all day and not seen a cover crop one, so maybe I think we need a bigger effort. But I will have to say, from a little bit of experience of doing it right now, there's more people lobbying on this farm bill than there's ever been. There's more people trying to make an impact on this farm bill than there's ever been. Individuals like Dave Brandt, like Gabe Brown, some of the movies that came out, the movies that are going to come out into the future, I think that's going to have a big impact. I think people are more concerned, more involved, but we need to keep this ball going and keep it going faster and faster and do more and more quicker.
I agree with you 100%. And hopefully the farm bill won't be just hit the copy button and renew it again for another 5 to 7 years. Hopefully we can make some progress that rewards farmers for doing the right thing instead of, not rewarding,
yes,
in inadvertently penalizing for doing some things. So
fingers crossed.
There you go. Well, Eric, I really appreciate your time today, and thank you for all your efforts in what you're doing there and thinking about water, not just as in a runoff that goes to affect somebody in the Gulf or downstream from them, wherever you might be, but it's think of it as drinking water.
Yes.
Would you want to drink the water that's leaving your field?
Yes, and that's the question asked. Yes.
If you can say yes to that, then you're doing the right things. Or if it's muddy and loaded, you need your head examined if you want to drink that stuff. But anyway, we need to be thinking about others, not just ourselves. And everything we can do to keep those nutrients and the soil in place on our own land is better for us, but it's also better for our neighbors and communities and everybody else that depends on us. So really appreciate your time today, and Eric, we'll stay in touch and keep fighting this fight together and help people to do one thing, right? Just do one thing. That's all it takes. And then once you get that, do one thing the next year. And
absolutely,
because we just don't have the time to wait 5 years before you do something.
Yes. Monty, I appreciate you having me on here. And if anybody wants to reach out, we'll get contact and stuff. But I love talking about this stuff and making an impact. And thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, very good, Eric. You have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. I hope today's conversation got you thinking of everything from livestock to water, as Eric and Monty discussed not only concerns, but the practical solutions to those concerns when it comes to soil health, livestock, and water. And as always, if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing to help growers implement soil health practices, check out our website at asn.farm. And there you can click on links to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. There's a lot of great things happening and always something to learn. Thanks for listening.